This is a story of the worst woman on the planet, at least that I know of. I know of some awful women. Eileen Wuornos, for example, killed 7 men. Casey Anthony, who may or may not have killed her own daughter. She apparently turned out to be innocent? Then there's Elizabeth Bathory, who in the 15 and 1600s killed a lot of people. For whatever reason though, in my opinion, maybe because it's relatively recent or just the story itself, which is horrific, this next poor excuse for a human being is the worst. In this case, I don't think hate is a strong enough word. I have nothing but whatever is harsher than hate for this woman. By the end of this video, after you hear all the details of this story, that you'll be just as pissed off as I am. That this lady even existed. Her name is Gertrude Baniszewski. I was going to give a full backstory on Gertrude, but decided she's not worth the time it would take to include it in this script. What you need to know about her is that she was a divorced single mother living with her 7 children in 1965. This is where the sisters, 16-year-old Sylvia and 15-year-old Jenny Likens, unfortunately come in. Sylvia and Jenny's parents were traveling east with a carnival and decided to ask Gertrude to watch the teenage girls from July to November, telling Gertrude that they'd pay her $20 a week to take care of the girls. She agreed, and the Likens girls were now living with Gertrude. Everything started off fine, it seems like, with the Likens girls being included in family activities and going to Sunday school with other kids. But a few weeks into their stay with Gertrude, their father would send them money a day or two late here and there, and this made Gertrude very unhappy. She began taking it out on the girls, spanking their bare bottoms with a paddle and saying things like, "Well, I took care of you 2 little bitches for a week for nothing." In August, so about a month and a half after the girls arrived in their new terrible temporary home, Gertrude began to abuse Sylvia significantly more than Jenny. Gertrude started to force her to eat leftovers and spoiled food out of garbage cans. It was suggested that her motivation to just attack Sylvia was that Gertrude was jealous of her good looks and potential in life. This was only the beginning of the horrific abuse. Gertrude would ask Sylvia if she had ever done anything with a boy, and Sylvia, not thinking sexually, said, "I guess so," further explaining that she's gone skating with boys and went to a park beach with them. She eventually mentioned that she once laid under the covers with her boyfriend. Days later, Gertrude told Sylvia that she's getting big in the stomach, and it looked like she was going to have a baby. Sylvia jokingly replied, "It sure is getting big, I'm just going to have to go on a diet." Gertrude then told her and the other girls in the house that if they did something with a boy, they'd definitely get pregnant. She then kicked Sylvia in the crotch. Paula, one of Gertrude's daughters, then knocked Sylvia off a chair, telling her she's unfit to sit in that chair. Another night, when the family was eating dinner, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy, Randy, force-fed Sylvia a hot dog that was overloaded with condiments, which she vomited up, and then they forced her to eat that throw up. Sylvia decided to retaliate against the abuse she was receiving from the family and at school, which Paula and Stephanie, another one of Gertrude's daughters, attended. She spread a rumor that they were prostitutes. This led to Stephanie confronting Sylvia, who admitted it. Stephanie then punched her in the face. Sylvia apologized and Stephanie began to cry, seemingly forgiving her. However, Stephanie's boyfriend Coy heard the rumor and attacked Sylvia, slapping her, slamming her head against a wall, and flipping her backward onto the floor. Gertrude found out and beat Sylvia with the paddle. Another day, yes, it just keeps going and getting worse for Sylvia, Paula beat her in the face, focusing on her eyes and mouth, so hard that she broke her wrist, which needed a cast. That didn't stop Paula though, who then later would use the cast to beat Sylvia even more. Gertrude would force Sylvia's sister Jenny to beat her as well. If she didn't comply, she would receive the beating instead. Eventually, Coy, Stephanie's boyfriend from earlier, and more neighborhood boys would come to the house to help Gertrude and her kids abuse Sylvia, which included using her as a practice dummy for judo sessions, lacerating her body, burning her with lit cigarettes over 100 times, and severely injuring her genitals. At one point, Gertrude forced Sylvia to strip in the living room and masturbate with a glass Pepsi bottle in front of everyone. Gertrude eventually stopped letting Sylvia go to school. Sylvia and Jenny were afraid to tell anyone as they feared it would just make everything so much worse. Sylvia became incontinent, which is the uncontrolled leakage of urine. To punish her for this, Gertrude threw Sylvia in the basement and tied her up, naked, starving, and rarely given any water. Gertrude started charging neighborhood kids 5 cents apiece to see Likens' body and to be able to do what they wanted with her. She would place Sylvia in a bathtub with scalding hot water just to rub salt in the wounds. Gertrude's 12-year-old son would rub urine and feces from the 1-year-old's diaper into Sylvia's mouth. Gertrude once again allowed Sylvia to sleep in a bed as long as she didn't wet herself. When she did, Gertrude forced Sylvia to shove a Coke bottle into herself and then ordered her to the basement. A bit later, Gertrude yelled for her to return to the kitchen, where in response to the prostitute rumors about her daughters, she took a hot needle and carved "I'm a prostitute and proud of it" onto Sylvia's stomach. Some of the neighborhood kids helped with the carving and added more themselves. The abuse just keeps going on and on and on, and eventually Sylvia would tell Jenny that she knows that she's about to die. Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter to her parents, framing some of the other boys for the beating and saying that she'd ran away from Gertrude's house. On October 25th, Sylvia overheard Gertrude talking to John about a plan to abandon and leave Sylvia to die in the woods. She attempted to escape, but being so weak she was unsuccessful. She was beaten and put back into the basement. Later that night, Sylvia started screaming and beating a wall with a spade, hoping to get the neighbors' attention, which she did. A neighbor of Gertrude's heard the noises and noticed it was coming from the basement, but when the noise abruptly stopped at 3 a.m., she decided not to inform the police. The next morning, October 26th, Sylvia was weak and could barely move her own limbs. Gertrude tried to feed her unsuccessfully. Later on in the afternoon, back in the basement, Sylvia was pointing at the people she could recognize and say their names. That night, Stephanie and Richard, a neighborhood boy, would give Sylvia a nice bath and dress her in new clothes. Then when they laid her on a mattress, she would mutter that she wished her daddy was here, and that she'd wish Stephanie would take her home. Sylvia stopped breathing, and Stephanie attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She was unsuccessful. Sylvia had died. Gertrude would beat Sylvia's corpse with a book, shouting, "Faker, faker," before ordering Richard to call the police. She would try to have all the kids and neighborhood kids stick to a different story, but their kids, it fell apart very quickly, and she was arrested. Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder. Paula Baniszewski, her daughter, the one responsible for most of the beating, aside from Gertrude, was found guilty of second-degree murder. They both got life in prison. Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, and John Baniszewski were all found guilty of manslaughter, receiving sentences of 2 to 21 years. 20 years after the death of Sylvia, Gertrude went to a parole hearing, which gained a ton of outrage from nearby residents and anti-crime groups. There was a petition of over 40,000 signatures demanding that Gertrude remain locked up. During the hearing, Gertrude said she wishes Sylvia's death could be undone. She then went on to downplay her role, saying, "I'm not sure what role I had in her death because I was on drugs. I never really knew her. I take full responsibility for whatever happened to Sylvia." The parole board barely voted in favor of granting parole. That's right. This fucking awful waste of space was released 20 years after Sylvia's death. During a retrial, Paula, who besides Gertrude, again was one of the worst abusers, and was 17, almost an adult at the time, decided to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She was resentenced to a term of 2 to 21 years. She tried to escape from prison twice, but was released in December of 1972, only 7 years after Sylvia's death.
It was a shock for a small Iowa town.
A convicted killer hiding her identity was teaching in their high school.
Kevin and Stacy, it happened in the town of Conrad, just north of Marshalltown in Grundy County. And tonight, a 47-year-old crime is the talk of the town.
One of their teacher aides, Paula Pace, is a convicted killer. In 1965, she was Paula Baniszewski in Indianapolis. She was a member of a family that tortured and killed a neighbor girl, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens, in the Baniszewski home.
I don't think that she should be working with children. in a school. It's been moved to the second, moved into closed session.
Apparently, the school board agrees. After meeting in a closed session Tuesday night, they voted to fire Pace. The board refused to answer questions about the controversy, questions about how this could have happened, why Pace's killer passed when undiscovered for 14 years.
Now, we tried to ask what Pace lied about on her employment application with the school district, but the superintendent, Ben Petty, said neither he nor the board would have anything else to say about that tonight.